started to pool our resources and sort of say, what do we have in common besides being in love? We decided it was love and peace, so what are we going to do about it? And then we got this letter from this guy, which was like a call-up paper in reverse, was saying, all you people with access to communication media, it's your duty sort of thing to do something about it, to try and change the world. And I was saying, all you need is love to 20 million people on live TV, And the Beatles were always for love. And Yoko saying, I was in Trafalgar Square in a black bag and all that. We tried to rationalise, what can you do about it? Only us, no matter how much publicity we could get. And all that. And what can you do? What's the point? It's been going on for millions of years. But we decided it's better to do something than nothing.
Promoting peace was an uphill battle in 1969. It was a cruel and angry year. Several large wars took their daily toll. It was no longer possible to avoid the graphic images of violence. Pop musicians could end their careers by commenting on even so obvious an issue. But the outspoken Beatle, the dangerous one, couldn't keep quiet. So what did John Lennon and Yoko Ono do? They lay down for peace. Nobody was quite sure what to think, but just about everyone paid attention.
You're just two dirty, filthy creeps, completely nuts. We judge junkies as the lowest creeps on this earth. And you two are the lowest. We spit on filth such as you. Charming, isn't it?
John and I were pretty naive in a sense that we thought it was a great idea, and so we just did it, That was kind of an artistic decision. We're both artists, so it was that. And when people ridiculed us and all that, we were a little bit put off, we didn't know it was going to be so ridiculed and all that. But, of course, we immediately realized that, it was to be expected.
The United States did not want John and Yoko to continue the bed in there, and his year-old marijuana conviction kept him out. Canada looked good.
Can you get us into Toronto?
Beautiful place.
Yeah, well, one of them, the Beatles and Elizabeth Taylor and Burton usually stay.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye-bye.
What is it?
The direct flight from Freeport to Toronto at 5 o'clock today, Air Canada jet.
Hello, Air Canada.
If we said anything in Canada, we knew that it would just go right away to United States. And also they were very kind of liberal people. We just knew that Canada would accept us.
After 2 hours of negotiation, Canada did let them in. They set up camp in the best hotel the city had to offer. By morning, pandemonium. Security was no match for Jerry Levitan, now a lawyer, then just a 14-year-old fan.
I went to the King Edward Hotel at about 7 in the morning, skipped school, and knocked on every door starting from the top floor. Woke up a lot of people. And then at one point, a cleaning lady said, are you looking for the Beatle? And I said, yes, I am. She said, he's in room whatever. Don't tell anybody I told you. Went down to whatever floor it was, walked down a corridor. It was a suite at the end of the hall, and I saw Kyoko, Yoko's daughter from her first marriage, who I recognized instantly, sitting on the floor in front of a closed door, drawing in a coloring book. And my heart stopped because I knew I found him. I had stolen my brother's Super 8 camera without telling him, didn't even know there was film in it, and started taking film, and I would go right up to Lennon's face and like zoom in and out. I thought, I gotta do something more than just this. And I said, John, can I come later and do an interview with you about peace and the Beatles and stuff, and take it to my school? And he says, yeah, that's great. Yoko, Derek. And he calls them both in. He says, this lad will come back later and he'll do an interview about peace and stuff, and he'll take it to school. That's what we want to do. Walked in, and there was a long row of reporters sitting in front of each other down the hall in front of this closed door. And there was American press, you name it, they were all there. And because it was the first time Lennon was on North American soil in a year and a half or 2 years or so, I wanted to go right to the door because it was about 6. And I remember one reporter grabbing me saying, where are you going? And I said, I have an interview at 6. And he says, yeah, you and the rest of us. The door opened up, it was Derek Taylor, and he said, where's the kid?
Levitan's feelings for another pop star, Pierre Trudeau, would affect Lennon's travel plans twice over the next 8 months.
When I asked him about how his peace campaign was going, whether he's making any effort to meet Prime Minister Trudeau, and he said, well, he heard that he was cool, and he said, we saw him, swinging in London with his leather coat on and dancing behind the Queen or whatever. And I said to him in my 14-year-old way, like he's really, really cool, and you really should meet him, and he's really good. And he says, well, if kids like you think he's cool, then maybe we should meet him.
The media was already speculating on just how far John and Yoko would go to meet Trudeau.
And I'd like to know when and where I said that I invited Mr. Trudeau into bed with us, and when and where Yoko said she thought that was a good idea. Complete pack of lies.
Among the parade of media was broadcaster Mark Starovich, reporting then for the Toronto Star.
Camera crews would come in and out. Can we get this shot here? Can we get you two together? That and another one. And it's still in my memory an unprecedented journalistic event. I can't think of the precedents in journalistic history before it, or I can't think of one since.
If the Toronto bed-in was strange, Montreal would see stranger things yet. This one made history. It was one of the most curious and celebrated public events of the last 50 years. It was a media circus with a purpose.
We're here as a protest against violence.
This time, it seemed like the entire world came to call.
We'd like to lay a bit of peace on it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, then. Of course we do. They know that. So come on out now. No messing about. Yes, you too, and you too. It doesn't matter who you were with. The people...
Some of that media never left. Montreal DJ Chuck Chandler.
712 with Charles P. Rodney Chandler as the Beatle beat goes on from the John and Yoko Lion. Right here on the 17th floor, Charles P. Rodney Chandler getting things together with the Beatles, baby, and the Battle of John and Yoko.
We thought it'd be a fabulous idea if we could do some kind of a remote, because we were the only rock and roll radio station in Montreal at the time. And after a couple of phone calls to the management of CFOX, who had no problem at all, saying, well, why don't you just do your radio show from the bedside of John and Yoko, and within a few hours that was all set up, and I was on the air, and it was, the rest is history.
Bring back my Coke, you thief.
There was a lot of horseplay. I mean, there was an awful lot of horseplay that was going on at the same time. As we said, it wasn't all serious. The cause was serious, but John, he kept it nice and light.
Richie York, Canada's leading rock reporter, came to Montreal for a story. He was so impressed that he attached himself to the cause for the next year.
This guy who could just hide away in his castle like most big rock stars is actually out there on the front line, talking about peace. They really thought it was fabulous. I mean, he gave them the leadership, even though he never wanted to be a leader.
So what's happening? Seems to be a lack of coordination in this room.
Sometimes things got a little dull.
I'm really worried about my tea. You like a cup of tea?
So, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation invited some other celebrities into the room.
We went down with the film crew, and we brought along Al Capp, and Tommy Smothers, and Dick Gregory, and some other friends to meet the Lennons. I'm Patrick Watson. This is The Way It Is, edition 68.
The first I heard about it, John and Yoko were going to meet a whole bunch of celebrities in a bed.
in a hotel room in Montreal, and you're going to get into bed with them and interview them there. Let's go. Have you detected in the development of his mind a particular point when this concern for peace began to crystallize?
No, because you see, the thing is that he's been for peace before he's met me, you know, and I was too, but I mean, it's the kind of thing that we were always very concerned about.
We say peace often enough. If I, John Lennon, say peace, it's going to make all those people who love me say peace. They're going to think about it. At least they're going to think about it, which is the most you can really count on. I don't have the sense that we felt we were doing something brilliant or consequential. It was more goofy and a lot of fun and a chance to see these people up close and see if they were worth taking seriously or not.
No, I mean, if people want to think of us as freaks, we'll be freaks for them. And if they want to think of us as musicians, we'll be musicians for them. And if it's like your lyrics, what do they mean? Anything you like, you know. And we'll be Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, or Jesus and Mary, or anything anybody wants to be. If we can get the message over, we'll play the part. And we don't have to play the part. We'll be ourselves, and people project these. They must be freaks, they must be hippies, they must be squares.
One of the first people to catch my eye, and I knew his face, was Timothy Leary, who was over by the window looking down over that great church next to the Queen Elizabeth that has all those lovely saintly figures across the facade.
What a green trip, huh? Yeah.
He was leaning down saying, what a lovely church, what a lovely, oh my, isn't that a lovely church? And that went on for some time, so it sort of set a mood in that part of the room.
Also in the mix, Toronto Rabbi Abraham Feinberg. He had two good reasons to be there. First, he was already a famous pacifist. Second, he too had been a pop singer. He attached himself to the campaign.
The love that the two of them have for each other extends itself to all humanity. It really does. I've already heard from leaders of the movement in the United States and Canada how happy they are that John and Yoko have undertaken to be the spearhead. They don't like to be referred to as leaders, but they are leaders because of what they are. And there's no couple in the world behind whom the young people will organize themselves more enthusiastically than behind John and Yoko, not only because of their fame and their acclaim and their prestige and their influence, but because of their personal qualities of character.
John and Yoko were trying to upturn the apple cart, and when anyone came along like a Rabbi Feinberg, they loved it. They thought it was great.
Lennon liked the rabbi singing and asked him to help record a song he had been rehearsing all week.
All we are saying, give peace a chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance.
Good morning, Yoko.
Sometimes it could have been mistaken for normal life.
We don't know what length the film's on.
I just woken up just now. Yes, you did. Say something for peace, Yoko, please. I didn't know anything for peace yet. You're still asleep, are you? Yeah, till I find some nice and peaceful voice.
But things turned nasty when right-wing cartoonist Al Capp entered the room.
And that dreadful Neanderthal fascist. How do you do?
Capp knew where he stood, and he knew the two people in bed were the enemy.
Well, I want you to know something hard, for instance. This too
Okay, can you get a chair?
Yeah, there's a chair.
Yeah, well, we're those famous freaks.
Yeah, the method you've chosen, this is to inspire peace, clearly. Yeah. What about during World War II? If Hitler and Churchill had gotten into bed, which Hitler would have clearly enjoyed, do you think that we'd have been spared?
I think that if Churchill and Hitler had gone in bed, a lot of people would be alive today.
I see that was
Just as Capp arrived, a potential riot was building at People's Park in Berkeley, California. One person had already died there.
You should keep up a constant, day-to-day, solid advertising campaign as they do to us.
John and Yoko were broadcasting live every day to calm the crowd.
We must do the same. Violence begets violence, and I don't believe in anything else, and I don't believe there's any park or anything worth getting shot for. And you can do better by moving on to another city or going to Canada or go anywhere. And then they've got nothing to attack and nobody to point a finger at.
But I do hope that you plan to make them as peaceful as you made these blood-crazed Canadians.
No, we're really talking to the best thing we've done so far is talk to the people at Berkeley, and we think we had some influence in holding back any violence that was going to come out of that. And we believe that, and we talk to them solid every hour before the march.
During this last week.
We talk to them every day. We talk on the phone, on the radio station, live.
I saw them throwing rocks at cops just a couple of days ago. You better talk to them a little more.
Well, nobody got shot this time, did they?
No, nobody got
And
shot.
what are you doing about it?
What am I doing about it? I'm cheering the police. That's precisely what I'm doing about it.
Why?
Now, you people have a home in London. Are you permitting people to come in and defecate on the rugs, smash the furniture, and beat you up?
Violence in that
Why do you want them to do it at Berkeley?
We don't want them to do it at Berkeley. We're telling them to protest some other way. If they stayed in bed at Berkeley, they wouldn't have got killed.
I couldn't believe how hard old Al tried to get John to punch him in the head. He just totally and openly insulted Yoko. You may well have film footage of it. It was just an amazing thing to see him, calling her awful names and just being totally belligerent to Yoko. Obviously suckering John into trying to throw a punch at him or something.
I'd be delighted with any conversation.
Okay, I'd like to add to what you said about John Byers. It's good to just overhear something.
I can see why you want peace. God knows you can't have much from my own observation. But anyway, I'm delighted to have met you, Madame New.
He kept calling her Madame New and insulting her, and John's face was working very hard. And it was a real test of the peaceable intentions of the whole summit.
Who do you write your cartoons for?
I write my cartoons for money, just as you sing your songs. Exactly the same reason.
Yeah,
and exactly the same reason much of this is happening, too, if the truth be told.
But if
do you think I could earn money by some other way, by sitting in bed for 7 days, taking shit from people like you? I could write a song in an hour and earn more money.
Now, look here. Now, don't say this. You got into bed so people like me
would
come to see you.
Not for money.
The tension in the room certainly built with the people, that were involved with it, especially Derek Taylor, who was over there sort of looking after John and Yoko, and he just got madder and madder. He was, ready to kill him.
I wasn't so sure that John wasn't going to go after him, and it may very well be that because Derek broke first, John saw what his responsibility was.
You are our answer to Madam New. But I'm sure the other three guys, the other three fellas, are Englishmen.
What does that mean?
Think about it.
Get out. I'll try and work it out. Now, Derek.
Oh, really? Come on.
But I'm not having these people insulted. Leave it, though. We asked him here. We asked him he's right. Forgive me.
For Derek, it's not me to forgive you. It's for your psychiatrist.
And yours, baby. Hello, Al.
Hi.
I think that incident was, at the time, you were very surprised and very upset about it, but, let's see, in hindsight, it was part of the game, and it was okay.
And you too, spread the word like butter.
And finally, in that Montreal hotel room, they recorded a landmark, the song still heard around the world today.
1, 2, 3, 4.
On the last day of John and Yoko's Montreal bed-in, the city began to respond. A crowd gathered on Mount Royal, looking for a love-in, Canadian style.
Gerald
Charles P. Rodney Channel from the bedside of John and Yoko. Here they're lying at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel with a reminder from all the good guys, and also John, why not get up to the mountain today and do your bit for world peace and joy and the living, loving lion that's happening on top of Mount Royal right now. What is the idea of all the kites? You want kites up there, too.
Oh, kites are beautiful, yeah. Fly kites, man. Kites for peace.
Yes, John just said that the flights are for, kites are for peace.
Kites and balloons and feathers, you know.
Anything at all, as long as it means peace, just get up to Fletcher's Field and do their thing this afternoon, right?
Do your thing.
I actually went up to the top of Mount Royal myself, to check out all the activity. And it just showed how the young people of Canada rallied behind it. They felt the spirit of it too. And, not just English Canadians, French Canadians as well.
As if drawn by a magnet, the Love-In moved down off the mountain, headed for the hotel.
Okay, hey, listen, you lot. Now, don't come marching down here, because you're only going to cause confusion, and the establishment will say, ha-ha, that's the result of John and Yoko's peace movement. Now, get back on the hill and play, or go back to bed, because you're only going to ruin the cause if you do it, It's nice of you to come and be with us, but be with us in concept only. And stay on the hill, because it's going to cause confusion. Now, we really want you to do that. Lay it on them.
It's much nicer on the hill, because it's peaceful and all that, and we get the vibration.
Well, I think people were concerned as to what might happen. It's just the sheer numbers, I think, what frightened the people more than the mindset.
The crowd kept moving until it was in the hallway outside their door.
Final one person in. Will you all promise to go back to the mountain?
This girl here, right there.
Oh, please. Promise is a promise. Now get out there and get them back, or go home, It's better than this.
See, it's hard. They're a mob and they're hard to control, but if you promise that you'll speak to us over the radio.
Sure we will. That's why we're here. Okay? That's a promise. Now get out and get back on the hill. We'll call you in half an hour.
Yeah.
Okay?
Peace to you.
Peace to you. Now really tell them that.
Right.
Otherwise we lose.
All right. We promise.
Okay.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Sorry.
Here.
Flower. Thanks. Don't really appreciate it.
Okay, here, I'll take some more. Yeah.
You want us all to go back to the hill? The hill!
Tomorrow we leave. We cannot believe it. We never meet again in these circumstances. We never meet you again like this. But it's been great, and I'm going to ask for Dylan to be played later. Fine song called Don't Look Back.
Don't Look Back by Bob Dylan. That's the one you want to hear, eh?
Sure.
Frank Gould is back there. He's listening to you.
Thank
Derek, where are you going tomorrow, by the way?
We're just leaving town.
You're not going to say where you're going?
Well, you seem to know already, We're going to Ottawa.
Well, yeah, we knew that. That's what we've heard, but I just want to get it confirmed from you because I didn't think you were going to go. Are you going to see the Prime Minister?
Yeah, see you in the airport.
Although they didn't know it, John and Yoko had been hoodwinked into coming to Ottawa. It was a daring move from a future cabinet minister, then a student leader named Alan Rock.
And we'd read, of course, in the papers that John Lennon and Yoko Ono were in Montreal at the famous Bed In for Peace at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. And so we thought, how can we get John Lennon and Yoko Ono to come to Ottawa? We had, at that time, a young, glamorous new prime minister. Pierre Trudeau had only been in office for a year. And so what we thought we'd do is suggest to John Lennon that he come to the University of Ottawa for a conference on world peace, which didn't exist, of course, except in our minds. But we'd tell him that if he came, we'd try to get Mr. Trudeau to come as well, and the two of them could use the University of Ottawa in this nation's capital as a platform to talk about peace in the world. We had this crazy afternoon. When Lennon arrived, of course, there was a huge crowd outside. This white Rolls-Royce pulled up outside the Arts Building. We ushered him inside through the crowd and put him at the table for what amounted to about an hour and a half press conference. And after that, we did take him over to the administration building on Laurier Avenue, which is a lovely big building with the columns and the stairs in front and then a big lawn in front of that. So we had a huge crowd there to see John and Yoko, and he came out and waved and said a few words. He got a rousing welcome.
Always come here to say to you, peace to you.
And then he wanted to see some of the city. So I pulled around my Volkswagen, and we put him and Yoko Ono in the back, and we drove him around Ottawa. We took him up to Parliament Hill, through the official buildings in downtown Ottawa, along the canal, and And then we went to 24 Sussex because he wanted to see if the Prime Minister was in. He wanted to know where the Prime Minister lived. And in those days, you could drive right into that circular drive in front of the Prime Minister's residence on Sussex Drive. And so we took him in there, and we parked and walked up to the front door and knocked. And a woman came to the door, and we said, is Mr. Trudeau here? John Lennon's here to say hello. She said, no. He says, he's not here at the moment. And so we said, can we leave a message? And she said, yes. And I got a great picture of John Lennon leaning up against the door at 24 Sussex, writing a note out to Pierre Trudeau, which we left. My deep impression of him is of a man who was kind and gentle, thoughtful, with deep, deep convictions, which he expressed sometimes in a very naive way or a very oversimplified way. But they were also positive and also humanitarian, that you really couldn't find fault with the energy that he put into this cause that he believed so deeply in.
He'll be well soon. He only lost a few days.
We got back in the car and drove around Ottawa. And I recall during the drive, we were listening to the radio, and a Beatles song came on. I think it was Get Back. And Lennon said, turn it up. So I turned up the radio, and he started to sing along in the back. And I thought to myself, imagine yourself as a 21-year-old kid driving your Volkswagen, and there's a Beatles song on the radio, and John Lennon's in the back seat singing along. I mean, you have to ask yourself, is this real?
When John Lennon and Yoko Ono finished their Montreal bed-in in June 1969, no one ever expected them to come back. But 2 months later, a concert promoter named John Brower was having trouble filling Toronto's Varsity Stadium for a concert featuring old-time rockers. Brower thought a Beatle on board would sell some tickets.
I made the call, and the receptionist at Apple answered, and I said, this is John Brower calling from Toronto. This is very important. We're calling to invite he and Yoko to be the MCs. A few seconds later, the phone gets picked up, and it's John Lennon. He said, well, we wouldn't want to come over unless we could play. And I said, well, of course, we'll find your spot on the bill. We'll squeeze you in.
I happened to be in London on the Friday afternoon before the rock and roll revival. And in the course of the afternoon, I was hoping to speak to John and Yoko. And suddenly they called me in. They had this guy from Toronto on the phone with the idea of them playing a concert the next day. Any chance for a Canadian appearance by John and Yoko and anybody else, I thought was just fabulous. So I pushed it on, got on the phone to Brower, told him that there was a really good chance, and we all started pushing for it to happen.
Just the rumor of a performance by a Beatle filled the stadium. Lennon arrived to find himself surrounded by motorcycles.
So we get, finally, John and Yoko into the limo and everybody else into other cars, and come down the service road, and the limo starts slowing, and John looks and sees all these bikes up in the distance, and he reaches over, he pushes down the two door locks on the limousine, and he kind of looks at me like, okay, we're covered. And I said to him, John, I didn't want to tell you about this until we got here, but this is your escort into Toronto. And he looked at me, and he broke out in a huge smile. 80 bikes fire up in this thunderous cloud of blue smoke. And off we go. And they just drove through the city. The police were alerted. They shut intersections because there was no way these guys were stopping for anything. They knew how to get to Varsity Stadium, and that was it. You better not be in the way.
That was the first time that I met with Richard, for instance. It was great. And John was explaining to me how important little Richard was. Oh, okay, and everything, And I come from the avant-garde music, and in that music world, it's a little bit like the classic world, When you do a concert, Carnegie Recital Hall or something like that, they have a nice waiting room, called green room and all that, And here we come in, and it's like the stadium, and the waiting room was a concrete place that was like bare, and everything. And I just couldn't believe it. I said, well, now rock and roll these days, full carpeted waiting room kind of thing, you know, but it wasn't like that in those days. And John was saying, well, this is how it is. This is rock and roll, you know. So it was a very interesting experience for me.
Overall, I think it was a great event, and I think the album really captures the feeling. And it was history. I mean, this is the first time a member of the Beatles had played a gig with a band of any kind since the Beatles phenomenon had happened.
There was more history being made. On that day, John Lennon realized he no longer needed the Beatles. 2 weeks later, he told them. After John and Yoko's Toronto performance, a group of Canadians hatched a bold plan. Their goal? To host the biggest crowd ever gathered in the planet's history, a festival for peace that would make Woodstock seem like a coffee klatch. The Canadians went to London to sell the idea, led by rock promoter John Brower.
We had it rehearsed. We had gone through it for days. You say this, I'll say this, we'll answer this, da-da-da-da-da. And after literally a minute, John just says, well, great then, what do we have to do? How do we start? And we just kept, you know, pitching like we didn't even hear that it was, you know, you sold it, don't buy it back. I mean, he was ready to, all right, let's plan it. All right, what do we do here?
It all started with one simple statement in bold letters. The message seemed to be everywhere.
The peace poster is in 11 cities throughout the world. That's New York, LA, Montreal, Toronto, Paris, Berlin, Rome, London, Athens, and Tokyo.
In Toronto, you couldn't escape it.
There were these billboards all over town that nobody knew what they meant. Huge black letters on white, war is over if you want it. I cannot emphasize enough the scale of the billboards. I'm not talking one billboard on Front Street or one billboard. I'm talking was as big as if you were launching a new Nike product or something. I have no idea how it was paid for. There's an army, surely of coordination, that must have gone behind it. There's some genius behind it. I wonder who it is, because you don't get billboards like that out with a machine.
They came from Yorkville, and they were all volunteers. And there were more than we could even handle. I mean, the word spread so fast. Everybody wanted to do it.
People can do war posters, for instance, locally, you know. Everybody says, well, it's all right for you two. You have all the facilities. But we're saying, you know, if some housewife is against war, just put it in the window, you know, just to let her neighbours know or her husband know. You know, you've got to start on the home ground, like convert your parents.
These volunteers were itching to pull off the biggest rock festival of all time. They were out in force as John and Yoko returned to Canada in December to announce the festival.
We came for a number of reasons. The main reason was, they're all to do with peace. The main reason was to set up with the help of some friends we have here, a peace festival for July in Mosport Park, July 3rd, 4th and 5th. All being well, and it'll be peace, poetry, and whatever. We're going to try and invite everyone who's anyone, whoever that is, you know. We'll try and get everyone we know to come and donate their time or whatever. But people will be paid for performance. So we'll try and get some cream off the top to set up a peace fund, you know. Because I can just see all the performers thinking, oh, no, he's going to come and hustle us to do something for nothing, you know. So we've got to give them something to get them interested, you know, and to pull them away from whatever work they're doing. And we hope to set up such a good scene that we could take it to Russia, say, like somebody suggested in one of your papers, you know, and in fact take it around the world.
Canadians again wanted to know why here.
Ideas come to us from Canada. Normally it's the other way around, you know, it's sort of, have you got any ideas? Like, it's a young country, it's right next door to the other place, and you're not. You haven't been converted.
The fact that we were Canada, that we were sort of, as we've always been, that middle ground between the old world and the excess of America, it made it an attractive place for him to be.
So it seems whatever we think about it, we keep coming back here without even having to think,
I just remember that the people in Canada were so great. I mean, they were sending us such warm vibrations, and it was just beautiful. Yeah. And it's just a very nice, warm memory. And of course, they were so good to us that we probably wouldn't have been inspired to do all that, like give this a chance, etc.,
Over the next week, they appeared in so many living rooms, it was hard to think of them as dangerous.
I'm Lloyd Robertson, and this is CBC Weekend. John Lennon is here in Canada selling peace. He is here in our studio tonight, along with Yoko and Rabbi Abraham Feinberg from Holy Blossom Temple. John, you've been terribly flattering to Canada since you've been around this week. What is it about Canada? Why is this peace movement being held here?
Canada is the first place that has given us something. For instance, the media and the press treat us as human beings.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm astonished.
I would like to know why you wouldn't choose a place where war is going on right now, or where there is a dispute in progress. Vietnam, the Middle East?
A, because Canada chose us as much as we chose Canada. B, we had an offer to go to Biafra, and then we had to consider the pros and cons of risking, I know it's a risk going across the road, but risking going through an area like that, Biafra, Israel, or Hanoi, whatever it is. How much can we do alive or dead? I don't want to be Mr. and Mrs. Dead Saint of 1970.
Rabbi Feinberg, there were some comments made yesterday from people in this country about this being a naive project, and some Canadians say it's a waste of time. What's your feeling about that?
Quite the contrary. I think this project of the Pop Peace Festival is very realistic because it's intended to leap over the politicians and reach the people.
They risked their reputation. They risked their credibility for peace. They put everything on the line. They declared themselves to be for peace. And that was not a popular theme in those days with the establishment.
We want to make peace economically viable, and so therefore, if there's money in it, the establishment will come along, Let them earn money out of it. Let them do what they like, But we don't believe there is such a generation gap. There are peace lovers of all ages and of all walks of life. We haven't particularly had more help from, say, hippies or whatever than we have from adults or like Rabbi Feinberg and people like that. There's plenty of adults that are just as worried and want to do just as much as the youth.
John and Yoko wanted no pandemonium this time, so they chose to hide out on the country estate of singer Ronnie Hawkins.
I didn't know that much about the Beatles at that time. My world was brass knucks and combat boots, and everybody was still, ruining their livers. Nobody was in that love and peace in my crew down there. I mean, it's still, rocking. When they pulled in, I'm standing there, waving and said, "Where's the Beatles? Where's John?" And he opened the door and says, "I'm going to give you 40 days to get back home." He knew all the words to ever, better than I did, some of them.
This is a house that Rock built. It belongs to Ronnie Hawkins. It's in a sort of secluded area out on Mississauga Road on the fringe of Metro, and inside today are John and Yoko Lennon, here to talk about their War Is Over campaign.
We stayed at Ronnie Hawkins' place, and it was very nice because it was a controlled situation where we had some journalists come, but the ones that we wanted to speak to, etc.,
I think they had 40 telephone lines in there. And, they were going all the time. Well, they were making phone calls. Princess Margaret, Peter Sellers, the ambassador to Japan, and 1 million people over there. It was big shots. I never even knew who they were.
John and Yoko once again headed to Ottawa and the goal that had eluded them 8 months earlier. This time, plans were firming up to bring them together with Pierre Trudeau.
I can only judge by his second, third-hand reports in papers and the impression he made in England, and it seems good,
Do you think he represents this sort of new age?
Well, he does seem to be this side of the Stone Age, Like he seems to
be youth-orientated, you know, and just the way he looks for a kick-off, you know. I mean, when he was in London, he went to the Arathusa, you know. I mean, that's like in.
Even though they were anti-political in many ways, they'd never had the opportunity to meet with a world leader. The English leaders, Harold Wilson and so on, just didn't want to know. They just considered them to be, you know, rock and roll crazies, you know, people you wouldn't associate with. Pierre Trudeau, however, had a bit more perceptive view on things, and his office embraced the possibility of meeting with John. He felt he had a lot he wanted to talk over with them, and this was a very important thing to John and Yoko, to be able to meet with a world leader, to be able to get him on side, or at least sympathetic to their cause, and he was, ultimately.
They had a little warm-up with then Health Minister John Monroe, as Lennon became increasingly nervous.
Just the thought of, you know, liaising, meeting with and talking with a prime minister, especially a guy that had this hip, cool image of Trudeau. He wasn't like other prime ministers.
We were waiting, and it was so exciting that we're kind of like holding hands and everything and nervous.
You almost laughed, except you were afraid they'd be annoyed at how nervous they got. You know, John biting his nails, chain smoking, carrying on. He was so gracious and warm and came out and extended a very warm welcome to them, and the meeting went on for like 45 or 50 minutes. It's only been scheduled for 15, and they just got into a whole lot of topics.
What took so long in there?
Well, I don't know. How long was it? We don't know.
An agreeable conversation, that's why.
Let me say that we achieve something by communication, and talk, even old-fashioned as it is as a communication method, it is still the method we use, and talk is the basic start to any communication.
And also, we got great incentive by just meeting him and seeing that there are such people like him in the establishment. He was a very kind of sensitive, almost like an artist, kind of delicate, sensitive kind of person. And the first thing he told us was that the fact that, you know, he's read John's book, which made John relax a little, you know. It was great, yeah.
If all politicians were like Mr. Trudeau, there would be world peace.
And it was great to have those two together, because I thought the world of Pierre Trudeau, too. And, you know, how we felt about him in 68, 69, the expectations we had for Trudeau, and a different approach to public office and public life. And seeing those two together was somehow fitting.
Well, isn't it amazing that at the time, I think it was very important that people like Pierre Trudeau and John Lennon existed. But at the time, John and I kept saying that we're not the leaders, don't follow us, you know, you have to do your own thing.
After meeting with Trudeau, John and Yoko's peace campaign was building up steam.
Are your views somewhat?
Richie York and Ronnie Hawkins flew off to tell the world.
We took off early in January and went to 15 countries, sort of representing John and Yoko, getting contacts from them in each of these countries, so that when we did the Peace Festival, we could do a Telstar link-up. We could satellite it all around the world, and we needed people in each country that could do that.
In Hong Kong, they took the message to the Chinese border, and then, accidentally, over it. They were arrested.
And I wouldn't have gone if I'd known, but the only thing that separates Hong Kong County from mainland China is a barrier in the middle of a highway that just keeps going. Well, boy, all of a sudden we're surrounded by Red Guard, but I'd have jumped out if I'd known it was going in there and not having a permit.
John and Yoko had returned to England, but already the Canadian festival was in trouble. The problem was money.
Everything looked good. The plan was to charge, because John and Yoko often expressed the thing, you can't expect people to do something for nothing. But the idea was to pay people a salary for the job they did, and then for the profits from the entire event to go to the peace campaign.
If I can get paid for performance, I'll take it. But if it's a case of it can't be afforded, or it would be better if I didn't get paid, I won't get paid. We've done the Plastic Ono Band, that's us and whoever else is around, have only appeared free so far. If I get the Beatles, I might have to pay them.
When you want to organize something like that, then we have to become like organizers. And we were not very good at that. John and I felt that we were good in expressing our feelings for peace and importance for world peace and all that in our own way, in an artistic way, such as maybe doing a bedding, which we did, you know. But when we start to become an organizer to try to collect people, collect other artists and all that, and make something out of that, it's just we weren't the kind of people who can do that.
Later on, John suddenly came up with the idea that he had a plan for the festival to be free. And of course, Brower was not thrilled at that prospect, because how can you put on a free festival?
Obviously saying that it had to be free for $1 was, the death knell to us. That was the end.
Well, we thought we can do it. But then the world was not ready for it, seems like. And, these days, you can get a sponsor to sponsor it and make a real great concert or something like that. But in those days, I don't think the big corporations were, they didn't think of an idea like that. And also, if they had thought of it, I don't think they would have gone for it because, well, they would have been scared to sponsor something like a peace festival.
The gulf was too wide, the split inevitable. The newspapers told the story. The festival to end all festivals was dead. John and Yoko's campaign never stopped. There were many rallies, protests, and manifestos still to come.
At 10 to 11 last night, John Lennon, with his wife Yoko Ono, returned in a limousine from a recording session to the Dakota, a luxury apartment building on Manhattan's Upper West Side. 30 seconds later, on his way into the building, Lennon was shot at least 4 times. John Lennon was taken in the backseat of a police car to a hospital near his home. He was pronounced dead on arrival.
Everything we did was, in a way, connected with promoting world peace. And, fate would have it that, I don't know if it was connected with that or not, but John's not here anymore.
We've been on our peace gig, as we call it, for a year solid. People say, well, do you think it's having any effect, or will it catch on, and all that? I can't answer that. It's like asking me in the cabin, are you going to make it? In the back of my mind, I thought, I'm going to make it. But I couldn't lay it on the line of when and how. I just knew we had something. It's just like we've all just woken up one morning and thought, is it a dream? Is it a nightmare? What's been going on? And we're all just trying to make the next day a bit better.
At the time, we thought that probably we were going to have world peace in a year. No, that's a joke and all that. But yes, we were kind of impatient people. We thought we did a great thing and, this is going to affect the world or something like that. And then we realized that it wasn't happening that quickly. And we started to, I think we had to learn patience.
I think it was a very positive thing. Cynics and so on have, over the years, given it a bit of caning and say, how stupid and naive all these people were, John and Yoko were, and the people that supported them. But I don't see it that way. I see it as a valiant attempt by a bunch of young people who felt hopeless, trying to, paint some sort of a picture of optimism in the world.
What was naive is in the mind of the beholder. It's like beauty. We lived for that truth in those years. History may have shown us that it was a little naive, but nonetheless it was intense and it was real and it was the truth of the times.
I think it gave us sort of something to get behind and also some reason for hope that there was in fact going to be a different approach to things in public life, a different ethic that would prevail, that there was someone out there speaking the things we all believe so deeply in.
I hope that there'd be a time when the world would really be so peaceful that they forget the word peace. They would, of course, forget about all the people who did anything for it, probably, and that's fine.
Because we haven't got peace in the 7 days, doesn't make it not a waste of time,
Oh, no, I don't mean that, because we may never have peace while we're alive together, eh?
Oh, yes, we will.
We will, yeah.
Do you really think so?
Yeah, sure, As soon as I believe sincerely, as soon as people want peace and are aware that they can have it, they will have it.
The story of how Fatia and I ended up in this gondola on a canal in Germany is a long one. It all began back in Morocco in Fatia's hometown of Fez, where I was researching a film.
He would stay up all night playing Beatle records that he had taken from the Honolulu library, playing them backwards and forwards.
This story will be told through rare photographs, never before seen footage, and exclusive audio tapes.
I heard a voice in my head, not audibly, but in my head, saying, "Do it, do it, do it."
It will also be told through dramatic reenactments, as well as through interviews with colleagues, friends, and other insiders.
The staff in the emergency department said, no, this is impossible, this is another person. And only when Yoko Ono followed about a minute later.
Liverpool started the rock and roll group that would become the Beatles. He predicted that someday they would be bigger than his American hero, Elvis Presley. And he was right.
There hasn't been this much excitement at the London airport since man learned to fly.
The success of the Beatles brought Lennon fame and fortune, but he was artistically and emotionally restless. By the mid-60s, Lennon wanted out from the band. He was also drifting away from his marriage to his art school classmate, Cynthia Powell, whom he had wed when she was pregnant in 1962. In May 1968, the 28-year-old Lennon began an affair with Japanese artist Yoko Ono, who was separated from her husband, musician Tony Cox. Lennon and Ono quickly became inseparable. In less than a year, both were divorced. Lennon left Cynthia alone to raise their 5-year-old son, Julian. With Ono, Lennon's whole life changed, according to biographer John Weiner.
Once Yoko was going to be his partner, this was like a partnership in everything, a partnership in art making, a partnership in music, a partnership in business, and a partnership in life.
Lennon's 1969 marriage to Ono, 7 years his senior, infuriated many Beatles fans. Sir David Frost interviewed the couple on his talk show at the time.
A lot of people did blame Yoko for the breakup of the Beatles, and it wasn't quite as simple as that. And I was talking only recently to Paul McCartney, and he was saying it wasn't quite as simple as that. And in the end, in fact, Paul McCartney played a role when they split up.
Lennon family friend Elliot Mintz.
I've seen these articles where women said he could have had any woman in the world. He could have had a woman who was blonde. What they're basically saying, of course, is that he could have had a white, Caucasian, blonde-haired, blue-eyed English woman. What they missed was the fact that he had found his other half, that he had found his soulmate.
Lennon and Ono's honeymoon, a public bed-in for peace, set the stage for a partnership of political activism and artistic experimentation.
I think she liberated the poet in John. You know, they have that wonderful sort of, slightly sort of metaphysical quality.
In 1971, the couple emigrated to New York. But within 2 years, they were having problems. The 33-year-old musician went on a drug and drinking spree in California, where he hung out with Who drummer Keith Moon and songwriter Harry Nilsson. He also had an affair with his and Ono's secretary, May Pang. Lennon would later call this episode his lost weekend. It lasted 18 months. At the end of 1974, Ono took Lennon back, but not without some conditions. One was that he quit drinking. Another was a bit more esoteric.
There is a body of thought among Japanese people that has to do with directions. And John was frequently asked to pack an overnight bag and fly, let's say, from New York in a westerly direction to California, and then further to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong in a northeasterly direction, etc., putting him back in New York, where all he'd have to do is be in the plane or get out of the plane for 15 minutes, get back in the plane, return, and as a result of this kind of traveling, things would be better for him.
When he wasn't on a plane, Lennon was settled in the couple's exclusive apartments at the famed Dakota Building on Manhattan's Upper West Side. In March 1975, at age 42, Yoko Ono found out she was pregnant. She had already suffered some miscarriages. Roy Cicala, owner of the Record Plant Studios and a close friend to Lennon during his lost weekend, remembers.
He came running into the office in New York City in the record plant, and he was like a little boy. He says, "Come here, close the door, close the door." I said, "Yoko's pregnant, Yoko's pregnant." Just the happiness that came out of him, though, when Yoko was pregnant was pretty noticeable. I mean, his whole vibe changed.
On Lennon's 35th birthday, October 9th, 1975, Sean Ono Taro Lennon was born by cesarean section.
The first time that I met Sean, John says, "Okay, now tiptoe with me into the other room so we can look at Sean." And I follow him, and Sean is just laying in bed. And I look at this, darling, beautiful boy. And John says, "Now don't breathe over him or anything, because of the germs."
Lennon had been shackled by recording contracts and professional obligations since his early 20s. Suddenly, he stunned the music world by announcing that he was retiring from his career to become a full-time house husband.
John thought about Elvis's situation. What happened to Elvis was he was sort of stuck being Elvis, and he was trapped in this world where he was surrounded by the Memphis Mafia, who kept him being Elvis. Lennon felt that the way Elvis the King was surrounded by his court was what really killed Elvis, and he was determined not to let that happen to him.
Author Fred Seaman went to work as Lennon's personal assistant in 1979, during Lennon's house husband period.
Another big part of the story was that he had really dried himself up creatively, and he had kind of lost his muse.
We all know what women wanted to do in terms of asserting themselves in the 70s, but I consider it a fairly revolutionary act for men to say, I'm going to give up all of that macho persona stuff to do something far more important, which is to vest my time with my child.
Lennon knew what it was like to grow up fatherless. He had been abandoned by his own father, a merchant seaman, when he was born, and he was rarely present to raise Julian, born in 1963.
Julian was born just at the minute the Beatles were hitting it big. So all the world tours, all of Beatlemania hysteria kept John on the road away from Julian. So he felt he hadn't been a good father to Julian, and he wanted to do it better with Sean.
Fred Seaman shot this rare home video when Sean was 4 years old.
Now we can play it back up on tape. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon. Go on. Good afternoon. And welcome to Cold Spring Harbor. When are we going to get in here? As soon as we get in, that's when we're going to get in. And that's Fred, the great cameraman from TV. How am I going to get in as a grown-up? We're going to climb through the window and break the window open with a trunk. Daddy, don't be a joke. Look, if your daddy's a joke, it's not his fault.
Ever the social revolutionaries, Lennon and Ono decided that she would take over their business affairs. Ono's family background in banking made her ideally suited to the job, as did some other, more unusual interests.
John and Yoko retained the services of a great deal of people who were involved in occultism, parapsychology, paranormal phenomena, astrologers, numerologists, psychics, tarot card readers. Yoko made an enormous amount of her business decisions predicated upon the dictates of these people.
A lot of this psychic consulting took place at night, in the middle of the night. Yoko sort of kept vampire hours, and I would just see these people like leaving the office when I would show up sometimes at 8:30 or 9 in the morning to open the office.
Ono invested in gold and in Holstein dairy cattle. She bought historic properties for their beauty and Egyptian artifacts for their magical power. She also represented Lennon at Beatles business meetings. By 1980, the Lennon's fortune was reportedly worth $150 million. One of Ono's investments was a Long Island mansion that had belonged to the Vanderbilts. While spending time at this retreat, Lennon learned to sail. In June 1980, he chartered a yacht with a crew of experienced sailors to sail to Bermuda.
He actually got more adventure than he bargained for because he ran into a major storm right near the Bermuda Triangle. And one by one, all the people on the boat dropped out and got sick. And eventually it was only John himself strapped to the helm who steered the boat through the storm, singing Liverpool sea shanties. I think that was one of the things that really gave him the confidence to begin working again as a musician, because as soon as he docked in Bermuda, he started writing songs.
In a fit of inspiration, Lennon composed a slew of new songs. He also reworked a few that he had begun in the previous 5 years. Back in New York, Yoko Ono was experiencing a creative spell too, composing her own songs. While Lennon was still in Bermuda, Ono put in a phone call to record producer Jack Douglas.
It was almost like getting called by the CIA, because the amount of secrecy. I was to go down to 34th Street, or somewhere around East 34th Street, in the East River, where a seaplane would be waiting for me. And no questions, just get on the seaplane. And then when I got to my destination, I was to be given a letter.
The destination was the Lennon's Long Island mansion. There, Douglas was met by Ono, who told him,
First, she said, whatever I say to you now, if you repeat one word of it, it'll not happen. And then here was this letter. It was in an envelope. It said, for Jack Douglas's eyes only. I opened it up, and inside was a letter from John and a tape. And John was in Bermuda. And the letter said, I think I want to go back into the studio. Would you be interested in producing my album? Here's a bunch of songs. I think they're the same old. Tell me what you think.
Douglas was one of the first to hear the makeshift demos that Lennon had recorded after his 5-year exile from the music business.
I listened to these songs, and they were just incredible. Fred Seaman was playing pots and pans. John was either playing piano or acoustic guitar. And, I mean, the whole thing was charming.
Douglas was convinced the material would make a terrific album, but Lennon wasn't so sure.
The thing that he worried most about was that the press would find out that he was making a record, and then it doesn't come out or we never hear from it, so he didn't want anyone to know. He was so insecure, it just like it baffled me, and he was so on the money immediately.
Meanwhile, on another island thousands of miles away, a troubled young man was becoming dangerously obsessed with his former childhood hero. Coming up, Mark David Chapman revealed.
His friends at the time remember him at the Christian youth meetings taking his guitar and playing and singing to the tune of Imagine John Lennon Dead.
Would you like to? In July 1980, while on vacation in Bermuda, John Lennon awoke from a creative slumber that had lasted 5 years. In a 3-week frenzy, Lennon wrote a group of new songs and reworked others. But even as Lennon was preparing to go back into the recording studio, a dangerously troubled ex-Beatles fan was setting the wheels in motion for a deadly encounter. Mark David Chapman's childhood was a grim setup for the dark path he would travel as an adult. Chapman was born May 10, 1955, in Fort Worth, Texas. He was raised in Decatur, Georgia. As a little boy, he often found himself caught in the middle of the violent relationship between his father, David, and his mother, Diane. Biographer Jack Jones spent over 200 hours interviewing Chapman over a 5-year period.
He remembers his mother rushing into his room in the middle of the night, sometimes scantily clad or not clothed at all, asking her son to protect her against his own father.
At around age 8, Chapman began finding solace in imagining a kingdom of little people who lived inside the walls of his bedroom.
When he was feeling badly, when his mother was having problems because of the violence being inflicted by the father, he could turn to the little people and sort of blow up 1,000 or 10,000 of them.
But when the little people were good, Chapman would reward them by playing Beatles music.
The Beatles are how he pretty much identified himself from that point right into his early teenage years, when he began taking a lot of drugs, again believing because of the message of the Beatles and their Magical Mystery Tour album that was the correct thing to do.
The summer of 1969 marked a watershed for 14-year-old Chapman. He embraced the world of psychedelic drugs. Suddenly, the outcast, nerdy youth had a hip identity, Mark the Freak.
He talked about being on drugs one night and other friends had passed out around him, and picking up a knife and having this urge to plunge it into their bodies, which he didn't do.
The drug-induced violent thoughts scared him. When Chapman was 15, a born-again classmate took him to a Christian retreat. Within 6 months, Chapman accepted Jesus into his life.
Ironically, about that time, John Lennon was beginning to make statements like the Beatles are more popular than Jesus, and write songs like Imagine There's No Heaven, which offended Chapman's sense, his newfound sense of Christian identity, right to the core. His friends at the time remember him at the Christian youth meetings taking his guitar and playing and singing to the tune of Imagine John Lennon Dead.
The born-again 15-year-old took a job as a YMCA counselor. His dedicated work and his intense affinity for children earned him plum assignments, including working with Vietnamese refugees at a YMCA resettlement camp in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas.
At Fort Chaffee, had an experience with a woman, his first sexual liaison, which was not good because he was at that time engaged to another Christian girl back home. He began writing letters back home to Jessica, the woman he was engaged to, about what an awful, faithless, vile creature he was.
In the spring of 1976, the 20-year-old Chapman joined his fiancée, Jessica, at a Christian college in Tennessee. But he was starting to fall apart.
He would meet with Jessica when they were studying in the basement area of one of the dorms at night, and go on these long, apologetic, crying jags, weeping, frightened, just the general symptoms of being severely clinically depressed.
Chapman dropped out of college and took a series of security guard jobs around Atlanta. Finally, in early 1977, he flew to Hawaii, but not for a holiday.
He was going to take all these black, dark, heavy, leaden thoughts of his to Honolulu and live an incredibly wonderful, elegant life for about 3 or 4 weeks. Stay at the best hotel, which he did at the Sheraton Moana, drink the best drinks, eat the best foods, and then he was going to commit suicide.
After indulging in the high life, Chapman had second thoughts about the suicide part of the plan.
He had called and told Jessica that he had planned to commit suicide, but, you know, one of these late night calls, your love has saved me. And this girl was put on the spot, not wanting to feel responsible for anyone's death. So he came home and discovered that she wasn't really serious, that, you know, whatever there had been between them romantically no longer existed.
Now even more despondent, the 22-year-old Chapman returned to Honolulu. He rented a car, drove to the beach at Bellows Field, and ran a vacuum cleaner hose from the exhaust pipe into the window. But he failed to asphyxiate himself. The hose melted, and a Japanese fisherman knocked on the window and woke him up. The next day, Chapman admitted himself into the mental health ward of Castle Memorial Hospital in Kailua. Convinced his failed suicide was a sign from God, Chapman underwent a near miraculous turnaround at the hospital. He was discharged within weeks. A month later, he was invited to return as a volunteer. Chapman quickly found solace working with other mental patients. Judy Harvey, a nurse at Castle, became Chapman's friend.
He was good, and that's why he was invited to do it. I mean, we're a patient coming back as a volunteer. Wasn't a real common thing to happen.
Before long, Chapman was hired to work in Castle's housekeeping department. But despite the acceptance he found at the hospital, he still struggled with mood swings. George Calliope was a counselor at Castle who also became close friends with Chapman.
I mean, he was just so extreme with the way our behavior should be. We should just own nothing, not think evil thoughts, not do anything wrong. I mean, he had to be like the Pope.
In 1978, with a $1,000 Christmas gift from his father, Chapman began planning an around-the-world vacation. Before long, the projected holiday turned into a 40-day first-class extravaganza. A travel agent named Gloria Abe helped him plan the trip.
Gloria was, I guess, a little bit socially naive, and Mark was the kind of person who could sweep her off her feet, and in fact did that. She became totally intrigued by him, totally enraptured by him.
When he came back, she was there to meet him, and, you know, that was a very big deal for him.
After a year-long courtship, the couple married on June 2nd, 1979, at the Windward Trinity Church in Kailua. He was 24, she was 29. But right away, there were problems. Chapman was distressed that his new wife had to keep working to help support them. Feeling pressure to earn more money, Chapman took a job in Castle Memorial Hospital's public relations department. But he left after a blow-up with a coworker. Chapman's next job, as a security guard at a Waikiki apartment complex, did nothing to boost his fragile ego.
He got to a point where he wasn't working at all. He was getting up in the morning at 7 or 8 o'clock and catching the tram downtown to the library, and on the way he would maybe pick up a big jug of beer, and so he'd be pretty well drunk by the time he started his day.
At the library, Chapman searched the shelves for a book that would change his life. He stumbled upon not one, but two. The first was J.D. Salinger's classic novel, The Catcher in the Rye. Salinger's adolescent hero, Holden Caulfield, had a mission to protect innocent children from what he perceived as the phoniness of the adult world. The second book Chapman was drawn to was Anthony Fawcett's John Lennon, One Day at a Time.
Here's a man that he believed to be living in England, an almost monastic kind of existence, devoting his life to peace. And instead, he saw a John Lennon who was a very well-off, multi-millionaire businessman. To Mark, that would be like, you know, a good, devout, contributing Catholic finding Mother Teresa in a casino somewhere, you know, living up the jet set kind of life.
Chapman became obsessed with these two books. His already tenuous hold on reality was slipping. Coming up, John Lennon's secret recording sessions.
He said, put the band together, but don't tell them who the record's for.
And later, Chapman loses control.
Gloria talks about him smashing and destroying her every earthly possession, including her phonograph and all of her Beatle albums, particularly.
By mid-1980, former YMCA counselor Mark David Chapman was spiraling into depression, a depression fueled by alcohol and a growing resentment of his former hero, John Lennon. Meanwhile, his ex-idol emerged from a self-created cocoon and took his first tentative steps back into the glare of celebrity. But events were being set in motion that would cost Lennon his life. John Lennon returned from Bermuda on July 29, 1980. He and Yoko Ono met with producer Jack Douglas to discuss their new album.
He said, I think I'll do it. He said, but here's the deal. No one can know about it. I said, well, I have to put a band together. He says, I know. He says, put the band together, but don't tell them who the record's for. It has to be a secret.
Douglas quickly assembled a group of top session men. All were checked out by Ono's occult consultants.
She was into numerology, so she'd have to get your date of birth, and I don't know, there's a few other things. I can't remember them all, but you definitely had to work on the session. Although the funny thing was that no one ever turned out wrong.
In early August, Lennon and Ono entered New York's Hit Factory recording studios to make their first album in half a decade. They paid for the sessions themselves to maintain secrecy. Titled Double Fantasy, the album was a dialogue between a man and a woman. Lennon's songs alternated with Ono's. Keyboard player George Small.
One of the things they were involved with as a theme with this record as well was the Browning poem, Let Me Count the Ways, which I think told of undying love and devotion to each other, so I know that he did adore her.
Roy Cicala, owner of the Record Plant Studios where Double Fantasy was mixed, cites another theme.
I think, if anything, that the boy, the baby, is what influenced this music.
Lee DiCarlo was the engineer for Double Fantasy.
For some reason, when you're working, you stare at the speakers. Sean's picture was right dead center between the two speakers, so whenever you stared at the speakers, you were staring right at Sean. So John very much was doing this album for Sean.
Lennon would sometimes bring 4-year-old Sean to the sessions.
And he might be in the booth doing a vocal, and you might call it, how'd you like that one, Sean? I mean, he was always aware of him, he was always interacting with him. I think he loved the fact that he was there.
The recording sessions were intense, often lasting 12 hours.
John would come in sometimes a little early and go into this little room that we had with beautiful oriental rugs off to the side, and it was where he could meditate and do some yoga before he'd come out and go to work.
But when it came time for Lennon to record a song, it was all systems go. Bass player Tony Levin.
Typically we would run it down for a while, maybe as much as an hour, just having fun, not really working hard on it. And typically John would then get really impatient with running it down and say, come on, let's do it. And we learned that at that point we're going to do the take, and you had to be in the studio. If you happened to be in the bathroom taking a break, you wouldn't be on that take.
One day, producer Jack Douglas played Lennon a preliminary mix of some of the songs they had laid down.
The next morning, he was very up and had his chocolate iced cappuccino, and he said, well, we're telling the press. He says, you realize it's going to be a madhouse.
On August 12, 1980, Lennon and Ono announced their comeback album. The phone calls from record company presidents began instantly.
I remember Bruce Lundvall from Columbia Records calling me and saying to me, Jack, whatever John wants, we will give him for this record. And I can remember Ahmet Ertegun actually getting into the studio, coming up out of the elevator onto the floor where we were recording, and being thrown out of the studio.
One of the executives burning to sign Double Fantasy was David Geffen, who had discovered Jackson Browne and Linda Ronstadt. Geffen had just formed a new record label under his own name. After having him checked out by her numerologist, Ono met with Geffen on September 19th.
Everyone wanted that record, but David got it, and he got it for a pittance. Nothing, really, about $1 million, maybe a little more. And here's how he did it. He said, I have 2 artists here, not one. I have 2 great artists. And Yoko was making the deal. And that was a very smart thing to say.
Ono and Lennon signed a contract with Geffen on September 22nd. 2 days later, the Double Fantasy sessions were moved from the Hit Factory to the record plant for final mixing. On October 9th, John Lennon and his son Sean celebrated their joint birthdays. John was 40, Sean 5. Ed Regan was an NYPD officer working the 20th Precinct, where Lennon's home, the Dakota Building, was located.
I was going to work one afternoon and noticed that there was a skywriter up there. And at first I couldn't identify what the writing was, but then as I got closer, I saw it was a message to John Lennon from Yoko. And the message was, happy birthday to John and Sean, love Yoko.
That was another thing this record was about him being 40. At that point, by the time he turned 40, he felt really good about himself. We got to call that album, John and I, we called it the Well album. Now I'm giving you the secret message, okay? But the secret message is all is well.
But all was not well. In Honolulu, 25-year-old Mark David Chapman was becoming convinced that the world of adult phonies, and especially John Lennon, the peacenik with the millionaire lifestyle, were to blame for his deepening depression. As Chapman's mental condition deteriorated, he reverted to believing in the imaginary friends of his childhood. Biographer Jack Jones interviewed Chapman in prison for more than 200 hours in the late 1980s.
He also turned once again to the fantasy world of little people who by that time had become sort of grown up and were wearing three-piece suits and, you know, nice shoes, and were the form of a corporate board to whom he had turned to help make decisions about getting his life in shape, getting his finances in shape.
But the imaginary little people couldn't help Chapman out of his depression. Finally, while looking at the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album one night, a solution came to him. He would kill John Lennon. This rare audio tape is taken from biographer Jones's interviews with Chapman.
I realized that I didn't make it through, but he did. And I felt that he had sold out. I wanted him because I couldn't handle being a nobody anymore. I was choking, I was suffocating in that nobodiness.
On October 23, 1980, Mark David Chapman worked his final shift as a security guard at a Waikiki apartment complex. He signed out as John Lennon. Chapman, the born-again Christian, began to pray, but not to God.
He stripped naked, he prayed to Satan. He would stay up all night playing Beatle records that he had taken from the Honolulu library, playing them backwards and forwards, screeching into a little tape recorder his own sort of murderous lyrics to Beatles songs.
Chapman's wife, Gloria, had learned there was little she could do to sway her husband.
Gloria talks about him smashing and destroying her every earthly possession, including her phonograph and all of her Beatle albums, particularly. Spitting on her, shoving her, open hand slapping. But reportedly, he also dangled her from the balcony of the apartment where they lived in Honolulu, which was 20 or 30 stories above the ground level.
On October 27th, Chapman entered J&S Enterprises in Honolulu and purchased a .38 caliber Charter Arms Special. 2 days later, he flew from Honolulu to New York with the handgun and $5,000 he'd borrowed from his father-in-law. Chapman had already made a reservation to stay at the Waldorf Astoria.
He had his cover story all prepared that he was going to New York City to write a children's book. And Gloria is a person who would believe anything Mark told her.
The day after his arrival in New York, Chapman began staking out the Dakota. He showed up every day and befriended the building's doorman, Jose Perdomo. Chapman also tried to buy bullets for his .38 caliber revolver. But in New York City, he discovered, one had to be licensed and bonded to purchase ammunition. In search of bullets, Chapman flew to Atlanta, Georgia, on November 5th to visit an old high school friend, Dana Reeves. Reeves was now a sheriff's deputy.
They did some target shooting, and Dana told him about these bullets that were very, very deadly if you wanted to, stop a human life cold. Bullets which when they went inside the body, shattered and expanded and did a lot of damage.
Chapman told his friend he wanted some ammunition for self-protection when he returned to dangerous New York. He convinced Reeves to give him 5 .38 caliber hollow point bullets. On November 8th, Chapman returned to New York. He became distressed when the Dakota doorman wouldn't tell him whether Lennon was in town. On November 9th, Chapman saw the movie Ordinary People, about a suicidal teenager coping with the death of his brother. Inspired by the movie, he called his wife to tell her he had come to New York to kill John Lennon, but that he had changed his mind.
Almost verbatim, the conversation that he had had a few years earlier with Jessica, he had with Gloria. He called Gloria and said that I was going to kill John Lennon, but I love you so much. Your love has saved me.
The following day, Chapman flew back to Honolulu. He threw his copy of Catcher in the Rye down a trash chute, but he didn't throw away his gun. Coming up, Lennon is on a musical roll.
The actual plan was to go to Los Angeles and start doing this Ringo album.
And later, Chapman returns to New York.
He passed himself off as a genuine, devoted Beatle fan who had come all the way from Honolulu to get an album autographed by John Lennon.
By mid-November 1980, 25-year-old Mark David Chapman was back home in Honolulu. He had gone to New York City intent on killing his former idol, John Lennon. But at the last minute, Chapman lost his nerve. While Chapman was planning his next move, the 40-year-old ex-Beatle was emerging from retirement, putting the finishing touches on his first album in 5 years. On November 14, 1980, John Lennon officially ended his self-imposed 5-year retirement from the music industry. His collaboration with wife Yoko Ono, Double Fantasy, was released as the first album on David Geffen's new record label. Double Fantasy entered the Billboard charts at number 25. Lennon was excitedly making plans for a world tour. Double Fantasy keyboard player George Small.
I was told it was going to happen probably in January, and it was going to be a whirlwind world tour. And it was going to be real quick, and he really liked that accelerated pace. Let's go, let's do it.
Lennon was making post-tour plans as well. Double Fantasy co-producer Jack Douglas.
The actual plan was to go to Los Angeles and start doing this Ringo album.
Double Fantasy engineer Lee DiCarlo.
He had a 3 to 5 album plan for how it was going to go. I don't think that John did anything without a plan. He wanted to build a studio. We talked about that. We were going to build a studio in New York.
Lennon and Ono immersed themselves in promotional activities. On November 26th, they made a Double Fantasy video in an art gallery in Soho. Alan Tannenbaum shot still photographs of the session.
They would walk into the room as if they had come from outside, first in their street clothes, the same clothes they had worn in Central Park that day, and then also with beautiful, authentic Japanese kimonos. They would come in and take their clothes off and get into the bed and were totally nude and pretended to make love.
Later, Tannenbaum showed the photographs to Lennon.
John said, "You know what I like about your photographs? You make Yoko look so beautiful." And they were radiant. It did come across in the photos, and you could tell that John was at a really good point in his life.
On Wednesday, December 3rd, Lennon and Ono allowed a rare photography session inside their Dakota home with famed Rolling Stone photographer Annie Leibovitz. Richard Vogel was Leibovitz's assistant.
He came in and he just sat with me and we just chatted. I mean, I was just a guy who was setting up lights and helping on the shoot. And he just made me feel like a brother.
That week, Lennon called record producer Jack Douglas. He wanted to remix some Ono songs they had recorded during the Double Fantasy sessions, but hadn't used on the final album.
He says, "Remember that track that we cut called Walking on Thin Ice that we didn't do anything?" I said, "Well, we never finished it. It was just, we only cut like a few bars of it. It never." He says, "What Yoko's got an idea for that, and she's written this wonderful poem.
By the end of the week, Lennon and Ono were back at the record plant, remixing her songs with Douglas. Meanwhile, back in Hawaii, Mark David Chapman had boarded a plane and was flying back to New York with money from his wife, Gloria. Chapman made up a story to tell Gloria. Biographer Jack Jones.
He told her that he needed to go back to New York again, this time to escort his grandmother who was visiting from the mainland.
Chapman's .38 caliber Charter Arms Special and 5 hollow point bullets were hidden in his suitcase when he checked into the West Side YMCA in Manhattan on Saturday morning, December 6th. As his depression and rage deepened, Chapman was identifying more and more with Holden Caulfield, his hero from J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye. Psychiatrist Daniel Schwartz examined Chapman after the murder.
Holden Caulfield, after getting expelled from school, spends 3 days in Manhattan before he's finally mentally hospitalized. And it's those 3 days in which he undergoes some unfortunate events. I think to that extent he identified with him, believing that he too had undergone a most unfortunate life.
Former NYPD patrolman Stephen Spiro also spoke with Chapman after the murder.
He had told me that he had gone into Central Park and followed the steps of Holden Caulfield. He took a taxi into the park. He talked to the taxi cab driver. He asked the cab driver where the ducks were, quoting something Holden Caulfield would say.
Central Park was right across the street from the Dakota. When he wasn't retracing Holden Caulfield's steps, Chapman was staking out the building where Lennon lived, as he had on his previous trip. On December 6th, 2 Lennon fans named Gerald Mole and Judith Stein were also outside the Dakota, hoping Lennon would appear. Chapman befriended them.
He had a copy of the album that he wanted John Lennon to autograph, the Double Fantasy album, which was just out at that time. And, passed himself off as a genuine, devoted Beatle fan who had come all the way from Honolulu to get an album autographed by John Lennon.
In the afternoon, the 2 girlfriends went to see a movie. When they returned to the Dakota around 5:15, Chapman was gone. John Lennon emerged from the building at 5:30 and chatted with the 2 fans. In the meantime, Chapman had returned to his $16.50 room at the YMCA. He fell asleep, but was awakened after midnight by the sound of male voices across the hall. Chapman heard the men talking about having sex with other men. It made him feel like killing them. Instead, Chapman left the YMCA and took a taxi to the Sheraton Hotel at 7th Avenue and 52nd Street. He checked into room 2730. By 9:30 in the morning on Sunday, December 7th, Chapman was back at the Dakota. He chatted up the doorman, who refused to tell him whether Lennon was in town. By noon, Lennon had not appeared. Chapman went to a bookstore where he discovered that the new issue of Playboy featured an interview with Lennon and Ono. He bought Playboy and a picture he liked from The Wizard of Oz, feeling a sense of affinity with the Cowardly Lion. He also got another copy of The Catcher in the Rye. Chapman returned to the Sheraton for lunch. When he went back to his room, he called an escort service, again imitating Holden Caulfield's actions. The woman who came to his room was wearing a green dress. Chapman was pleased to note the synchronicity with Holden's prostitute, who coincidentally also wore a green dress. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Chapman paid the escort $190 and she left. Chapman then called his wife Gloria in Hawaii. Gloria was reading her Bible. When Chapman hung up, he took his own Bible out and opened it to the New Testament. After the words, "The Gospel according to John," he wrote, "Lennon." He then set his alarm for 9 a.m. He had a busy day planned.